Come on, Chuck, show me something. Bill Wallace threw the fastest kick in professional karate at Chuck Norris's ribs, full speed with no warning. Chuck caught it on the point of his elbow and did not throw back. Wallace reset, breathing hard already, and threw the same kick again. Chuck was not there for it this time. He had moved 4 inches inside the arc, and Wallace's heel passed clean behind his back. It was a Wednesday morning in June of 1978. The rehearsal stage at producer's studio on Melrose Avenue was quiet, and the 17 crew members standing in a loose ring around the mat had stopped moving. Word had gone around the unit 2 days earlier that the moment was coming, and every one of them had made sure to be on the stage that morning to see it happen. The tension between the 2 stars had been building for over a week, and everyone on set could feel it. What followed in the next 3 minutes was the only round Chuck Norris and Bill Wallace ever fought. It was not on the schedule, it was not in the script. Bill Wallace was 32 years old that morning. He was the reigning middleweight champion of the Professional Karate Association, 4 years undefeated. The Black Belt magazine had put him on their cover 2 months earlier because a stopwatch at the studios in Manhattan Beach had clocked his signature kick at 0.17 of a second from initiation to impact. In 4 years of title defenses, he had knocked 17 men out with that kick. Nobody in the sport had built a defense for it that worked. Chuck Norris had just caught it on his elbow the way another man catches a ball. 6 days earlier, Chuck's brother Aaron Norris had walked Bill Wallace through the first 11 beats of the third act fight choreography at quarter speed, on the same mat at producer's studio, on the morning of Thursday the 15th of June. Chuck and Aaron had built the full sequence together, 41 beats, over 9 weeks of rehearsal in a garage in Tarzana, with Bob Wall consulting and Pat E. Johnson taking Chuck's corner. Chuck had drilled every beat until he could do them in his sleep. Wallace had missed those 9 weeks. He had been in Memphis defending his Professional Karate Association middleweight title against a challenger out of Kentucky, and he had won by knockout in the second round and flown to Los Angeles on the last day of May. The rehearsal at producers was the first time he had ever put his hands on the choreography. He listened, he nodded, and he did the beats. The work was fine, not more than that. Chuck met him for the first time in the parking lot of producer's studio on the 1st of June. Wallace pulled up on time in a green Mustang with a duffel bag of gi trousers slung over his shoulder, and he shook Chuck's hand with a smile that Chuck read the second he saw it. Chuck didn't say a word about the smile. He walked Wallace into the stage, introduced him to the crew, and let Aaron start the rehearsal at quarter speed. The first day was fine. Wallace worked through beats 1 to 11, without a word out of place. He hit his marks, he held the pace, and Chuck watched him from the edge of the mat and said nothing to Aaron when the day ended. By day 2, beats 12 through 22, Wallace was bored. He had been the fastest kicker in professional karate for 4 years, and he believed, the way a lot of fighters do, that fight choreography was something you picked up by feel. On the way back from lunch, he said something to the second unit director. He told her the pace was killing the material. She wrote it down in her notebook because she wrote everything down. Chuck heard about it at dinner. He nodded and kept eating. On day 3, Wallace started pushing. Not full speed, a little harder than half. Aaron caught it on the 4th beat and stopped the rehearsal. The pace is the pace, Bill. Wallace told him he was a fighter, and the pace had to breathe. Aaron said it again, lower this time. The pace is the pace. Chuck watched the whole exchange from 10 feet off the mat and said nothing. That night, Aaron drove down Melrose to the coffee shop where Chuck was eating, sat down across from him, and put both hands flat on the table. "You feel him pushing," Aaron said. Chuck nodded. "I feel him. You want me to say something to him? Not yet. He's going to push until he's sure of what he thinks he's sure of. Let him get sure. Then we'll see what happens." Aaron looked at his eggs for a long moment. Chuck told him to eat, and he ate. On the 4th day, Wallace was leaning against the wall of the wardrobe department between setups, holding a paper cup of coffee, talking loud enough that the wardrobe supervisor could hear him from 6 feet away. The choreography was a fairy tale, he was telling the second unit director. In a room with no cameras, Chuck would not last one round with him, and Chuck knew it. Chuck had retired from full contact in 1974 because he had seen Bill Wallace coming for the middleweight belt. Bill Wallace was the reason Chuck Norris was making movies now instead of fighting. The wardrobe supervisor was a woman named Elaine Ricci. She finished hanging the last of Chuck's costume shirts on the rack. She walked directly to Aaron's office. Aaron walked directly to Chuck's trailer at 4:15 that afternoon. He said it again, Aaron told him. Chuck asked who had heard it. Elaine, Karen from second unit, 2 grips, Pat. Then the whole crew has it by dinner, Chuck said. Aaron asked what he wanted him to do. Chuck told him nothing. Wallace would say it again, he told his brother. He had to, and Chuck would handle it then. The 5th day was the first day Wallace put his hands on Chuck. It happened during the second take of Beat 16, which called for Wallace to throw an open-hand parry at the back of Chuck's right wrist at half speed. It was supposed to be a marker, a tap, a gesture the camera would sell as a block. Wallace drove the parry at full speed instead, and caught Chuck's radial nerve clean. Chuck's hand went half to sleep. He did not call cut. He finished the take. When the assistant director called cut, he walked across the mat, stopped 4 feet from Wallace, and looked at him. Bill, that is not how we are doing it. Wallace grinned. It is a fight scene, Chuck. Fight scenes have contact. If you swing for me one more time at full speed, Chuck said, you will get one back at full speed, and we will not be filming after that. Paul Aaron had been watching from the monitor and called a 30-minute break. The 6th day was the shoulder graze on the crossing block, and Wallace did it again, harder this time. The strike caught the meat of Chuck's shoulder, and Aaron Norris stopped watching the monitor and walked to the middle of the mat himself. Bill, we are not insurance liable for a knockout. This stops here. Wallace told Aaron to tell his lead to keep up. Chuck did not move. He looked at Paul Aaron and asked him to run the take one more time. Paul had been directing pictures for 12 years, and he saw something in Chuck's face he had not seen on the picture before. He rolled the camera. The take was clean. Wallace did not push it. That night Aaron came to Chuck's room at the Sunset Marquis at 7:40. He sat down at the small table by the window without leaning back in the chair, which was how Chuck knew what the conversation was about before Aaron spoke. He is not done, Aaron said. I know, said Chuck. He is going to do it on the master shot. I know. Aaron asked what he wanted him to do. Chuck told him nothing, same as before. Aaron pointed out that Wallace was going to do it in front of the whole unit, and Chuck told him that if that was what it took, then the whole unit was going to see what happened. Aaron looked at his brother for a long time, said all right, and walked out. Chuck ran 4 miles along the ridge road above Laurel Canyon before breakfast the following morning. He was thinking about 6 days of choreography and 1 kick. By 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 21st of June, every one of the 17 people who made up the pre-production unit knew what was coming. Word had moved through the crew the way word moves on a working set, which is quietly and completely. On the master shot of Beat 22, the close quarters exchange with the entry to the sweep, Bill Wallace was going to push, and Chuck Norris was going to answer. Nobody left the stage at lunch. They ate sandwiches out of paper bags, sitting on apple boxes, and stayed close. At 10:47 in the morning, Paul Aaron called a 20-minute break. He did not tell the 17 people around the mat to leave. He did not have to. Aaron Norris walked to the middle of the mat, looked at Chuck, then looked at Wallace, and set the terms. Same rules as Long Beach in '74, he told them. 3 minutes, no head strikes with intent. If either of them saw blood, they stopped. Both men nodded once. Aaron stepped off the mat, There was no bell, there was no call to start. Both men knew what the beginning of the round looked like without being told. Wallace moved first, because Wallace always moved first. He committed the reverse side kick from the false lead, the technique his entire career had been built on, 37 seconds into the round. His lead foot appeared to plant. His rear leg whipped through in the full hip rotation the sport had timed at 0.17 of a second. His heel traveled through the air at chest height with the full weight of his body behind it, on the exact line where he had knocked out 17 men in the previous 4 years. Chuck was not on that line. He had moved on a 45-degree angle inside the arc before Wallace's supporting foot had finished pivoting. Master Shin had taught him the pivot in a converted house outside an Air Force base in Songtan in the winter of 1960, and Chuck had drilled it against every rear leg kick a man can throw for the 18 years since. His right hand was already chambered at his hip in the position from which the reverse punch was thrown, and Wallace's heel passed 11 inches from Chuck's left shoulder. Wallace's peripheral vision caught the chambered hand as he was resetting, and his nervous system understood what had almost happened before his rear foot had returned to the mat. Chuck did not throw the punch. He unchambered the hand and stepped back to a neutral stance 8 feet from Wallace, hands hanging at his sides, face unchanged. The senior members of the crew understood what they had just seen. Aaron understood it first. Pat E. Johnson understood it a quarter second later. Chuck had watched the kick for 6 days and knew the geometry of it better than Wallace did, and he had chosen not to end the exchange. The exchange was not going to be ended in the first 40 seconds of the round. That was the message, and it was a message in a language only Wallace could read. Wallace did not read it. He reset his weight and threw the same kick again. This time Chuck stepped toward the kick instead of away from it. He closed the range from 8 feet to 4 in a single pivot, and Wallace's heel passed behind Chuck's back at a distance no man in Wallace's career had ever managed to close on him. Chuck loaded the reverse punch a second time and did not throw it. Wallace flinched, 4 inches at the shoulder, the involuntary flinch of a fighter whose nervous system has processed a threat his conscious mind has not caught up to. He had not flinched in a professional round of his life. Chuck reset again. Wallace changed tactics. He abandoned the reverse side kick for the 2-kick combination he had used to win his first title in 1974, which was a lead leg roundhouse to the outside of the thigh as a rangefinder, followed by the same kick at full speed to the ribs. It was the combination his name was in the record books for, and his heavy bag work in his garage in North Hollywood had been built around it for 6 months in preparation for the picture. He threw the rangefinder. Chuck checked it with the outside of his own thigh, rotated 18 degrees so the kick landed on bone rather than muscle. The sound the two shins made when they met was the loudest thing in the room for a full second. Wallace's rhythm faltered for the first time. He threw the second kick anyway. His doctrine required it. Chuck checked it the same way, only this time the check was calibrated. His thigh rotated 2 degrees further, and Wallace's shin caught bone at the exact point where the tibia is at its most exposed. A hairline bruise began forming on the outside of Wallace's shin. He would find it in the shower that night, and he would remember it for a long time. Wallace reset for the 4th time in 90 seconds. His breath had shortened. He had thrown 4 committed techniques and landed nothing, and he had never been in that position before. He committed to the combination he had been holding for 4 years. It was the one Wallace had drilled in his garage every morning since Long Beach in 1974, when he and Chuck had shared a bracket at the Internationals, and Chuck had gone to a decision with Skipper Mullins. Wallace had watched that decision from the stands and gone home certain that his time was coming. Jab, cross, lead leg round to the ribs, all 3 techniques thrown as one motion. It was the answer Bill Wallace had spent 4 years preparing for the man across from him, and he threw it now. The jab landed. It landed on the meat of Chuck's left forearm, in the outside block Chuck had drilled 20,000 times on the heavy bag in his garage in Tarzana, and it redirected 6 inches wide of Chuck's cheekbone. The cross was already coming. Chuck slipped it by rotating his shoulders 4 degrees, and the cross passed clean over his right ear. The lead leg round was the third technique, and it was the one Wallace had invested in. He threw it at full speed, at full commitment, at rib height, at the exact geometry where he had knocked out 4 men in the previous 18 months. It landed on Chuck's elbow. Chuck had dropped the elbow 2 inches. Wallace's instep met the point of Chuck's elbow at the geometry where the small bones of the top of the foot cannot survive full-speed contact with a man's elbow, and Wallace made a sound. It was the involuntary sound a fighter makes when he understands, in the middle of a technique, that his own weapon has just broken in his hand. He reset a 5th time. His lead foot was compromised. The 17 people around the mat had not made a sound in 90 seconds. Norris took half a step forward. Pat E. Johnson caught his sleeve. Wallace came forward again. His plan had failed, and his doctrine had failed, and what he threw now was the sequence a fighter throws when he has run out of preparation and is fighting on 20 years of instinct. A hook, a knee, a rising elbow, a spinning back kick behind them all, ready to fire the moment the elbow landed. The hook came first. Chuck rolled his head under it, the same way he had rolled under Joe Louis's hook at the Sportatorium in Dallas in December of 1967. The knee came second. Chuck checked it with a knee of his own, the only real contact he had initiated in the round, and the sound the 2 knees made when they met was the second loudest sound the room had heard. Wallace's face changed, for the first time in his adult fighting life. He had just understood that the man across from him was not going to make a mistake. The rising elbow came third, and this was where Chuck moved. He did not defend the elbow. He stepped inside the arc of it, taking the point of Wallace's elbow on his own shoulder rather than on his temple, and in the same motion he brought his right hand up under Wallace's chin. He did not strike. He controlled. He stopped the forward motion of Wallace's head at the exact instant Wallace's body was still committed to the elbow's rotation. It was a technique Master Shin had taught him in Songtan in the winter of 1960, called Songkal in the Tang Sudo syllabus, and Chuck had adapted it in 1965 into a control rather than a strike. Wallace's head stopped moving, his body did not. His shoulders continued rotating past his head, and for 1 full second, Bill Wallace, middleweight champion of professional karate for 4 years, was standing with his weight in the wrong place, his lead foot compromised, and his own opponent's hand under his chin. Chuck held the position. He did not sweep, he did not strike, he held it for 1 full second, so Wallace, and every trained fighter watching from the ring around the mat, understood what had just been made available. Then he let go and stepped back 2 paces. Wallace did not fall. His feet found the mat again in a stance that was upright, but was not, in any real sense, a fighting stance. The spinning back kick he had been holding behind the elbow never came. He could not throw it. His body was not in the geometry to throw it, and his mind was no longer in the geometry to want to. There were still 40 seconds on the clock. Nobody was running. Neither man moved. Norris walked to the middle of the mat, looked at Chuck, and Chuck nodded once. Looked at Wallace, and Wallace looked back at him for a long moment, then nodded once too. "That is the round," said. Chuck walked toward Wallace and closed the 8 feet between them at a normal walking pace. He extended his right hand. Wallace looked at the hand for a full second. Then he took it. Chuck did not release the handshake right away. He held it, and he leaned in, and he said something to Wallace that only Wallace heard. The 17 people around the mat could not hear it, and would not have repeated it if they had. Pat E. Johnson was close enough to catch some of the words, and he would not repeat them either. Aaron Norris, standing 4 feet away, would say only, decades later, that his brother had said something to Bill Wallace on the mat at producer's studio that morning that had changed the rest of the picture and had probably changed a piece of the rest of Bill Wallace's life. He would not elaborate. What we know Chuck said, because Wallace himself would describe the substance of it in an interview 28 years later, was something to this effect. "Bill," Chuck told him, "you are the fastest fighter alive today, and you will be the fastest fighter alive when we are old men, and there is a thing that is older than fast. You saw it in the last 3 minutes. The day you understand what it is the day nobody catches you again." Chuck let go of Wallace's hand and nodded once. He walked to the apple box at the edge of the mat, untied the drawstring of the borrowed gi, folded it once, and handed it back to Aaron. His denim jacket was on the back of the folding chair. He put it on and walked toward the loading dock door at the far end of the stage. The stunt team parted for him as he walked. They simply stepped aside, the way crews step aside for a man they want to see pass close to them. Several of them reached out as he went by, a hand on the shoulder, a brief touch on the arm. The small physical gestures men make when they want to confirm to themselves that the man walking past them is real. Chuck nodded to each of them and did not stop. He reached the loading dock door, pushed it open, and the June sun from the Melrose lot came through the doorway in a hard, bright rectangle. He stepped out into it, and the door closed behind him. Wallace stood in the middle of the mat for a long time. Pat E. Johnson brought him a paper cup of water. Wallace drank it without looking at anyone. He walked to the wardrobe department, changed out of the gi, and drove himself back to the Sunset Marquee in the green Mustang. He did not speak to anyone on the way out of the studio. The rest of the picture went smoothly. Chuck arrived on set at 6:30 every morning for the remaining 4 weeks of principal photography, and Wallace was there before him. Wallace hit his marks. He drilled the choreography at the pace Aaron set, and he did not push a single beat past half speed for the rest of the shoot. The on-screen fight between his character and Chuck's, when the picture was released the following May, was one of the cleanest full-contact style sequences of the decade. Wallace was widely credited with elevating what could have been a routine karate picture into a genuine showcase for the technique of both leads. He did every kick the choreography asked him to do, and he lost every exchange on camera the choreography asked him to lose, and he did it with a precision that made the sequence sing. Chuck never spoke about the 21st of June to anyone outside the crew. He kept a rule, dating back to his tournament days, about not commenting on encounters that were over. The rule was that the encounter contained whatever it contained, and saying anything else about it afterwards diluted what had happened. He kept the rule for the rest of his life. He was asked about A Force of One in dozens of interviews across the decades, and he always answered the same way. He would smile slightly and say that Bill Wallace was one of the finest fighters he had ever shared a mat with. He would change the subject. Wallace kept his own silence for 28 years. He gave one full-length interview to a martial arts publication in 1983, and the interviewer asked him directly whether it was true that he and Chuck had gone one round in rehearsals on the picture. Wallace smiled and said that he and Chuck had trained together the way any two lead fighters trained together on a picture, and that the training had been valuable to him, and that he had learned some things from it. The interviewer pressed him. Wallace did not elaborate. In 2006, at his induction into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, at a ceremony at the Beverly Hilton, Bill Wallace stood on the stage in a black tuxedo with the trophy in his hand and gave an acceptance speech that had been prepared and printed on cards. Halfway through the speech, he set the cards down on the podium and looked at the front row. Chuck was in the front row. "There is one man in this room I owe something to that I have never said in public," Wallace told the audience. "I was 32 years old, and I was the fastest fighter alive, and I thought I knew everything. And on a rehearsal stage in Hollywood, in the summer of '78, this man gave me 3 minutes of his time. Everything I have learned in the 28 years since has come out of what he showed me in those 3 minutes. Then he looked directly at Chuck. Chuck, he said, I said it to you on the mat that morning, and I never said it to you again. I am going to say it to you now. Thank you. That is all. He picked up the trophy and walked off the stage. Chuck stood up in the front row and applauded. He was the first one on his feet, and everyone in the room understood, from the specific way he had stood up, that he was applauding the man who had given the speech. The applause continued for some time after Wallace had left the stage. A Force of One opened on the 4th of May in 1979 in 620 theaters, and it grossed $20 million in its first month. It was the first commercially successful full-contact karate picture of Chuck's career. It set the template for every action picture he made for the following 10 years. It also, without the audience of that period ever knowing why, launched Bill Wallace's career as a fight choreographer. After the picture wrapped, Wallace called Aaron Norris and asked whether Aaron thought Chuck might have use of a fight coordinator on his next several pictures. Aaron passed the message along, and Chuck said yes. The two men worked together on 4 more pictures over the following 7 years, and there was never another incident. Neither of them ever spoke about the 21st of June again to each other, or to Aaron, or to anyone else on the crew. Anyone can throw a fake reverse punch. A green belt can throw it. Aaron Norris could throw it. It takes one afternoon of drill to make it look convincing, and it takes a lifetime to know when to hold it back. The fake Chuck loaded twice in the first 40 seconds of the round in Hollywood, in June of 1978, was not the technical achievement of the morning. The technical achievement was the 6 days before it, when Chuck had watched Bill Wallace push at him and had told Aaron 3 separate times to do nothing. Holding your hand when the choice is available is the hardest thing a fighter learns. Chuck had spent 18 years learning it. He used every hour of that 18 years on those 6 days. When the moment came to answer, the answer was small, and it was quiet, and it lasted 3 minutes, and the man who received it thanked him for the rest of his life. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. If you enjoyed this, then you'll love the true stories from the behind the scenes of Chuck Norris's movies. Scan the QR code on the screen to get your copy, or visit realstoriesfromtheset.com. From the Coliseum fight with Bruce Lee, the 4 days in the West Texas dirt with David Carradine, the squib that nearly took his eye in Manila, the helicopters that went down in the Philippines, all gathered into one place for the first time. And remember to hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.